Hey everyone, Valentina Flores, CEO of Red Sentry, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast where we talk about all things security, try to break it down beyond buzzwords, what's actually happening in the industry right now. And SOC 2 is one of those topics that everyone has an opinion on, and rightly so. Some people think it's table stakes, some people think it's become just checkbox, and a lot of people are trying to figure out how to improve it, like how to grow it in this current age. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to do it better, trying to do something new. And one of those that we talked about recently is Rippling. And so I have two awesome SMEs here today. We have Emma Lawler, we have AJ Yawn, and they're going to talk about what Rippling's doing differently, why it's different, what the industry is kind of moving toward. And we're going to ask some questions and challenge some status quo here. So Emma, if you want to start off and just kind of give us your background and what you're doing at Rippling.
Yeah, so I'm the product lead for Rippling Automated Compliance. And before I came to Rippling, I was a founder. And one of the things I had to do was get my company SOC 2 compliant. And it just felt like a waste of time, money, energy, all of the kind of busy work that you had to do to get there. And so when I came to Rippling, I was really excited to build this product because Rippling has been helping companies get SOC 2 compliant for a long time. We have all of the data that a company uses to operate their company. So like, has someone taken a security training? Is their device encrypted? There's like hundreds of pieces of evidence you have to collect. And now we're just formalizing that process. So we're able to pull out all that data that already lives inside of Rippling and show an auditor how a company is compliant. And the third-party auditors are like completely off-platform and independent, but all that rich data is already here. So it's a super exciting product to be building.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about, kind of the automation, the independent, the first-party data that you guys already have and like why that's a little bit different. Yeah, a lot to talk about. I'm excited for it. AJ, I think your shirt says it all. Modern GRC is engineered, not documented. So you don't even have to talk, but if you want to, give us your background and kind of what brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my shirt says kind of, I guess, what I believe in and what I've spent my entire career doing, from the early days of being a junior SOC 2 auditor to founding a company in this space and to being a partner at a CPA firm on the other side, and also being audited as a GRC engineer at companies. And now I'm a GRC engineer here at Rippling, helping with building the product with Emma and the team to help folks use automated compliance in the right way. And Emma talked about the auditors, Emma talked about the customers, but I think the most important thing that I've always believed in, that we're taking very seriously, is that automation doesn't matter unless both sides of the table benefit. Auditors have to benefit from it and the customers have to benefit from it. And we're taking an approach to make sure that the data that we're showing and the way that customers can react to that data is done in a manner that just makes sense, that makes sense for how companies operate today. So it's exciting to be at Rippling, at a company that's growing and doing as much as it's done and has already built, we have a strong foundation on top of. But I'm really excited about what this means for the industry, because like you said in the beginning, there's a lot of noise around there about SOC 2 and compliance in general. And I think we are at an important point in the history of GRC that we can do something positive. I'm excited to be a part of the change, not just screaming about the problems.
No, that's a really good point, AJ. And sometimes I'm kind of known as like a contrarian, if you will. I like to challenge things a lot. But at the end of the day, like, we have to all be fighting for like what the better option is. And we can't just like naysay everything all the time. And so I'm excited to dive in. And I think you being a SOC 2 auditor previously is really interesting because, that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, is that side of it. And fair warning, I'm not going to allow you to say it depends today. That's my challenge to all SOC 2 people, is you're not allowed to say it depends when I ask a question. But no, I think it's really important. I think compliance is not useless. Like, compliance is important. And like, we have to have compliance. It's a seatbelt. It's the only reason that people are doing these security things. So until we're all perfect and security focused and amazing, compliance is important. And there's just a better way to do it. Kind of jumping into some of the things we talked about, the manual versus the automated. I want to start with that because it's something we've talked about a lot, Emma, in just the perspective of like the industry terms and how those are kind of construed in different places. So SOC 2 feels very manual. We've all been founders. We've all done SOC 2 painfully. Why is it still so manual, and what are you guys doing to change that?
Yeah, I mean, I think manual evidence is not necessarily a bad thing. At the end of the day, it's just a document that shows some security process you have in place. And in some ways, that's required. So, like if you're documenting some process or plan that you run internally, it's not like you can automate a human process. And so that's an example of manual documentation that makes sense. But when it comes to like going into some system, like let's say you're going to look at Jamf where you run your devices and you're just taking screenshots of configuration setup, that's when it's a waste of time, because we can actually go look inside of that system, pull in that data and be like, look, every one of your employees has an encrypted device. And that's where Rippling has a huge advantage, because we have the employee object at the center of everything. And so not only do we have a list of devices that are like, you don't know where they belong, they're kind of just floating around, they're actually tied back to a person. So we can say like, AJ has these two devices assigned to him, they're both encrypted. And so I think that's where a lot of the wasted energy comes in, is when you're configuring all these things, you're like doing a bunch of manual joins and you don't really know how it's all connected together. And so you can save a ton of time by just going straight to the source and having structured data that tells you the truth. And then on top of that, operating your company in a way that's compliant by default, instead of like going and collecting a bunch of evidence to prove the point right before an audit. And so that's the way we're trying to change the industry.
Yeah, SOC 2 is so funny. Like, there's so many people that have just never done a SOC 2 audit and they have no idea like what all this means. And it's the evidence versus the audit versus the testing. Like, those are very different concepts. And I think that's what's important to differentiate here. When Emma's talking about the evidence collection, it's instead of going and taking a screenshot, it's just pulling it. And I think what's interesting is a lot of in cybersecurity, especially, whenever the word automated comes out, it kind of usually means less thorough. But in GRC, automated is much more thorough, because we've all been around that first year you do SOC 2 audit where you're just kind of posting random screenshots and hoping that it passes something, right? Whereas you guys are looking and showing the actual gaps and deficiencies. So I think it's a very different thing.
Right. I think that's a great point. Automated does not mean we're going and doing things without your knowledge. It never means that. It means you have made a decision that like all of your employees' devices should be encrypted. And now we're just like surfacing that.
Yeah, no, it's the evidence. Like, you are bringing the evidence much more visible and transparent. And that's what is being automated. So yeah, AJ?
Yeah, I think for most people, it still feels manual, because a lot of times we've taken a process that, and Elon Musk says this a lot, it's like a lot of times organizations try to optimize processes that shouldn't even exist anymore. So we've taken like these very manual processes and just thrown what we call automation on top of it. And you're just grabbing a screenshot, to Emma's point. And it's like, wait, like, let's take a step back. There's zero reason in a modern world to grab a screenshot of something that has an API that we can connect to and get the data in real time. And I think both you both made great points that automation is not a bad word, especially not in GRC. This is a good thing. And I think one of the things I talk about a lot, I wrote about, is that we have to look at GRC from a first principles perspective. We have to kind of start over and say, like, what are we trying to do? The goal was never, with GRC or even SOC 2, the goal was never a piece of paper. It was never a report. The goal was to prove that you had a mature security program so that you can do business with other people and those people can feel comfortable. And if our goal is to say, like, yeah, like, I want this company, whether it's a 4-person startup or a 100-person company or a 10,000-person company, to do the right thing, and I want to know, then yeah, we probably should be collecting the data from the source. And that doesn't mean that like there's not going to be manual evidence. Like, SOC 2 has controls around board of directors meeting minutes. We're never going to automate that until the boards are just AI agents, I guess. Then we can figure out how to automate it, right? But right now we're still going to have to collect that manually, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're talking about the systems, and I think one of the reasons why I have been so big on this engineering movement and pushing for automation is because the amount of data even a small organization interacts with and deals with on a regular basis, and how ephemeral that data is. Instances are not living long. So if we are doing screenshots, if we are collecting data manually, we probably are not collecting like the real information. We're probably collecting something that is like short lived. Like if you've been at any modern organization, you understand the velocity at what a software company is shipping right now. It is insane to think you can manually check to see if some of these things are happening. And security has shifted left. That has happened. I know it was a buzzword for a long time, but like DevSecOps is real. We put security into the pipeline. GRC for some reason has stayed on the right. And I think now with what we're doing at Rippling and what we're trying to do is say, hey, GRC, it's time to shift to the left. And that's not a bad thing. You're just finally catching up with the rest of security.
Yeah, I've actually never heard that before, AJ. I like that analogy a lot. And yeah, that's so interesting. That's a very good point. The shift left, hashtag shift left GRC is going to be AJ's new thing. No, I think it's a really good point. And I think sometimes the person doing the audit also, like who in a company is in charge of this audit, is usually not someone in security, which is weird, but it's just how it happens by default. And so the person collecting evidence doesn't know what the evidence is and what that means. And so it's a totally backwards system. And I agree, AJ, like kind of starting fresh and like, what is the goal here? A lot of people think, like, I know sometimes we accidentally use words like passing a SOC 2 audit, but like there's no passing, like it's a report and it's showing your environment. And like, we just have such a misaligned view with what SOC 2 is. Looking at like the different stakeholders, because I think that's part of the thing is like the clients are trying to get frictionless. The SOC 2 auditors want mountains of evidence. The platform wants automation and ease. Like, how do you kind of balance all of those things?
Yeah, it's kind of a high friction environment. Like when you're an in-house compliance team, you are running your company in a compliant way and in a secure way. That's the goal. And then you're trying to share almost as little information as possible with an auditor. And then when you're the auditor, and AJ, you can speak so much more to this, you're trying to like get all the information you need to have assurance that like this company really does the thing that they say they do. And so the platform is an interesting kind of like Switzerland space where we should not have an opinion about what the data should be, especially for SOC 2, where there's just like so much customization that has to happen to a company's policies and processes. And we're just making it really easy for the company to find the data that already exists, to surface it in a way that the auditor can sample, and then give the auditor complete independence to take that data off the platform, perform the audit, and come back with the report at the end of the day. So that's where we've spent a ton of time is like, how do we structure data in a way that both sides can really manage it in the way they need to, and then make the communication really seamless. But we're not layering on any opinion about like how those two workflows should happen.
Let me ask you a question, Emma, because I think the customization is interesting because I think that's where sometimes it sounds like automation and customization are mutually exclusive. Like they sound like opposites. And I think, even back when we were doing our manual SOC 2s years ago, like it always just felt like not everything applied to us. And it was like, well, why do I have to talk about, this like physical building when like we're remote? And so I guess, how do you guys tackle that customization? Because I know you said that the clients make the decisions and then you guys just surface that evidence. So how does that work?
Yeah, so like if you're a complete newbie to SOC 2, like when I was a founder doing SOC 2 for the first time, you don't know what SOC 2 is. And so you actually need a lot of guidance. And so I think back in the day, people would hire consultants or they would like hire an entire compliance team. And so we can kind of fill that role of being like, hey, here are the basic requirements that we recommend you follow for SOC 2. But then from there, the company can customize however they want. So like if they see some control that says, I don't know, something like every employee completes a background check before the date that they start working at the company, and they want to like tweak that slightly, they can, and then they're just going to have to show different evidence. So we give people baseline guide rails and we're like, hey, this is kind of standard practice, but then they can evolve it to meet their company needs. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have in-house GRC teams who know exactly what they're doing. Like, they don't want guidance at all. The guardrails are really annoying to them. And so they should be able to come in, upload their own policies, upload their own controls, and then just use our monitor library, which is like, our monitors are structured in a way where they're very composable. So you can have one monitor that checks that GitHub PRs are approved and another that they're reviewed. You can use them together. You can use them separately. And so we let you just like use our library in whatever way makes sense for your company. I'd be curious from AJ to like hear about what happened before. Like, before it was automated, I think the auditors like came into your office.
It's a big Excel sheet. I got a big Excel sheet the first year, and I just had to like keep typing stuff in the Excel sheet in all the different lines. What did you used to do, AJ?
It's worse than you think, I'll tell you that. So like, I wanted to answer your question, I wanted to like actually go back there and think and just think about these three parties as users, as kind of user entities, right? So back in 2017, I would get on a plane and stay in like the worst hotel in like the worst city possible and be there Monday through Thursday. And I would go into a company's office and sit in a conference room, and it's just like the loneliest, worst conference room in the company. And then people would come filing in and out to talk to the auditors. Nobody was happy to come into that room. Not one person was like, yeah, I'm so excited to come talk to these auditors. I tell the story often that I was doing like a wrap-up retro with the founder after it, and he like stops me halfway through and he's like, AJ, like, I completely expected you to be like Toby from The Office. I did not expect you to be like a normal person. Like, that's just the perspective I had. Because he was like, the request list you all sent was like crazy. It was this long Excel, and then we would literally just like, we had a whole script. Like, it was terrible, honestly. And this is why like I was so addicted to figuring out a way to automate this, because like I can't spend the next 20 years of my life looking at screenshots.
I mean, if I may, AJ, you're clearly a Holly, not a Toby. I mean,
Exactly. Right. I'm not a Toby at all. I was like happy, but I was offended. I'm like, wait, is that what you all think of us? But at the end of the day, I had a job to do. So like, we would go on site and we would have to look at things. Like I would catch things on site looking at evidence. So I think as we think about the auditors, the important thing to remember is we had a job to do. The other thing that with us coming on site, it was such a more of a collaborative process between us and the person running the audit. There was no in-between party. We would talk about things. We would talk about things after the interviews, and like, it was just very collaborative. And then around 2018, you started to insert these automation tools. And one of the things that happened is there was this adversarial relationship created between the tools and the auditors and the customers, because the tools came and said, hey, we can automate anything. You're going to get a green check mark and your auditor won't have to do a thing. Us as the auditors were like, wait a second, we still have a job to do. And we'd like need to get paid for that job. So like, there was an initial like just friction. And I think that friction has stayed for the last, 7 years or so. And so one of the most refreshing things that I learned about as I talked to Emma and other folks as I was joining Rippling and since being here is our approach to removing that friction. And if you and not being a platform that says, hey, auditor, you have to accept whatever we give you and you don't get to look and see what it is. And then on the customer side, we're not telling them that a green check mark means you're going to pass your audit. We are telling them that, hey, this is informative. You can use this as information, but you and your auditor are still going to have to work together to come to this. And I think that respects both sides, because the auditors do still have a job to do. And it is a very important job. And the customers, they do want, as a user, you have to understand, like, these customers need a clean SOC too. And clean SOC 2, I don't agree with. I think, and I was actually doing a podcast with a few CISOs recently, and the CISO of Rippling said he does not trust clean reports. He doesn't trust an all green dashboard. Like, they want to know that there are some things that are red and yellow, but we created this world where all SOC 2s have to be clean. And
like, you have to have a perfect pen test report, and it's like, well, that's silly. Like, that.
It's like, I don't think that's the point. But it's like, okay, like, I empathize with the user on that side, right? And from a platform perspective, we want you to use our platform to manage your program. I think where the future is, and the future that we're trying to build, is that every user has their needs met because they're being thought about. We're intentionally thinking that the auditors have to do a job. So that means they're allowed to view the data behind any check. They're allowed to ask for more information. They're allowed to go back and forth with the customer without us jumping in and saying, hey, that's a bad question. Don't ask that because you're going to make our customer mad. That's not our role. But our customers get to use an app that tells them when things are going bad and wrong and then get to fix it. So I think the friction became because of the way that automation was inserted, which I think happens in every single industry. This isn't unique to GRC. As soon as something gets automated, everybody's like, oh no, you're going to take this job. You're doing this. And we're seeing it with AI right now. But there's actually like a study that Andreessen just put out talking about how software engineer roles are up. And everybody, all the narratives are that software engineers are dying and we're not going to hire. And it's just like, that's what happens, right? And then as people use technology, they realize it doesn't have to be a fight between all sides. It can be a collaborative. And I think that's what we're doing. We're turning, kind of changing it back like, hey, let's get back collaborative like it was when we were in person, but we can use technology to do it.
Yeah, AJ for president. No, I think that's so important, AJ. And like, it is so adversarial. And I mean, the same thing in all cybersecurity, like when AI pen testing came out and it's like, well, scanners versus pen testing. And it's like, well, no, they're different. Like everything has its place. And there's also, I mean, as clients, we have to remember that just because you have one auditor that maybe a little bit of snake oil or maybe passes stuff, and then you get that idea that that's what all auditors do. And same with GRC platforms. You know, like
I think just to jump into that point a little bit, as the client who's getting a SOC 2 report, although you would like to share the report with your customers and have it be clean, like AJ is saying, the benefit is actually to have a third party look at your systems and be like, hey, this is actually trustworthy. So that's the most important part, that auditors have independence and can like operate the way they need to. Otherwise, like the whole industry doesn't.
And just for like, I think we should pause there for 1 second, because just so everyone knows, I've badgered Emma 1,000 times about, you know, automation and independence. So I want to clear that up, because I think that's the fear that a lot of people have, especially over the last few months, or I guess since the beginning of this year, is like, does automation equal rubber stamp? Like, if we're being totally transparent, that's what people are wondering. And so if you want to talk about the independence for a second, and just so everyone knows, and I think I've said this before, but we are independent pen test partners for Rippling. So we are doing pen testing for their clients. And that being said, that's one of the reasons I know they're doing independent testing. But also, you know, we deep dive into every GRC. We're partners with multiple platforms, but we have done a lot of deep diving. And I think what they're doing really is so different than others, and just like the rethinking of it. And so, Emma, if you want to talk about independence for a second and how that fits into your guys' values and what you're trying to build.
Yeah, I mean, to start on pen testing, we're not involved in the pen testing process. Like, we shouldn't be. We work with partners like Red Century to say, hey, we recommend that you work with this firm, but you can work with whatever firm you want to. And they are going to run a pen test based on the level of assurance that you need. And so when you go work with Red Century, you can choose whatever plan that you want. You can go as deep as you want. And so it's really about, I think people don't know this about SOC 2 when it's their first time, but it's really about, what do you want to signal to your customers? Like, what level of security do you want to be able to have in your report? So when a customer reviews it with their procurement team, they have confidence that the sensitive data that you pass through your platform is going to be really high quality and safe. And so, like, we don't want to touch that. Like, we want Red Century to run a real pen test so that a company feels good about their internal processes. On the auditor side of things, it's the same. We need to prepare all of the evidence and the data in a way that the auditor can actually see transparently what's happening, and it needs to be observable. So, like, we don't tell you what to sample. We give auditors full control over the data that they're sampling out of our system. We have no opinion about that. And that was something we actually went really deep with one of our first partners, Johansson Group. We met with them once a week to design a product for them, not just for our customers. And I think that's a huge differentiator on the market as well, and something they really appreciated. Like, some of the auditors there were like, a platform has never treated us this way. They've never treated us as a user. And that was really surprising to me. So
yeah, shouting out Johansson for 1 second, because I think that's a good point, is that sometimes when you see people working together, you're like, okay, well, maybe like they're just kind of like, maybe it's less thorough. But again, it really means the opposite. It means that like we've done the due diligence. So like, for everyone, Johansson, they're a partner of ours. They have been for years, and we've done audits through Johansson for ourselves. And I can tell you that they are very independent because they give us a lot of friction, but in the best way. And it's something that should evolve every year. Like you get SOC 2, and then maybe you do type 2, type 3. Maybe this year we're doing ISO, which is kind of a whole new growth world. And that's kind of the value of having someone that you kind of have already done the due diligence on. And like if you trust Rippling and you kind of know, okay, this is an independent partner, you don't have to use them, but they're here and we've already vetted and the reports match and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think it was really important to us to see how the industry evolved in the past year with AI, because everyone was like, what is happening? And a lot of platforms decided to abstract the experience, to be like, we're just going to do it all for you. You don't need to know an auditor. You don't need to know what SOC 2 is. And so some of the customers that we migrated from other platforms had never met their auditor. They didn't know anything. They didn't even know what controls they had attested to. In some cases, they didn't know that they even collected the evidence, which was really alarming to us. And so like I think we go into a level of detail where there's almost no abstraction, and maybe we can like, make some things easier even. But that was really important to us to make sure like companies know what they're signing up for, because it's actually like the way they're running their company. We're not just like doing stuff for you.
The goal of SOC 2 is not like a scavenger hunt for pictures. Like the goal is to have better security. And like we just always it just goes back to evidence. And I get it, like it's part of the report. It's the hard part when you're rushed and you got 1,000 things on your plate. But the point is to better your security. Like that's the whole thing. So yeah, I think bringing
and like AJ's role is to go like do a scavenger hunt of like what is the structured data across the entire internet that we can pull in, so that like no matter what your process is, we can help you make that part of your SOC 2 audit without needing to go take screenshots or anything else.
Yeah. AJ, anything to add on kind of that evidence collection and where it lives? Because that's obviously a huge part back when you were an auditor and then a founder, and now kind of where the evidence lives being such a challenge in SOC 2.
Yeah, I think it's historically the process again has just been adversarial. It's been and then it's also been a aspect of, with some of these tools, a fear of exposing too much to the auditor and making things available to the auditor. So I think one of the things that we've done very well here is, again, treating auditors and customers as separate users, but users that need to interact with each other and need to actually go through an audit. And I think that the just last piece on independence is we all have seen how important that is and what it means when independence is not respected. And I think that it's the amount of interest right now is a good thing for the industry.
100%.
Because there's a way more scrutiny on things, and it's making all of us ensure that we're doing the right things, which I think is going to allow SOC 2s to get more valuable over time than less valuable, because now people are saying like, hey, I do want to take a different look at this. I do want to go a little bit deeper. And I think when you're able to use automation to expose data that an auditor, I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with an assessor, and at first there was a ton of friction around some automation stuff that we built. But over time, as they got comfortable with it, they became so grateful for the amount of data that they were able to use to make their decisions. They were like, I've never even looked at this piece of identity before because I never had the knowledge that it existed. And now I can actually have a stronger control. I can do a better job. So I think what we're going to see, hopefully, and we'll be able to prove this out with our product and with our customers, the reports are going to mean more because of the data and because of the independent auditors that are going deeper. And it's not about, hey, they're going to be the prettiest report and clean, like, who cares? It's going to be about that there's a good job done. And I kind of equate this whole aspect of a clean report like going to the doctor. Like, I don't want my doctor to lie to me. I would rather him tell me or her tell me like what's wrong. I don't want to come out of there with like, hey, look, I got a clean report from the doctor, and then I'm actually like have like 2 weeks to live. Like, I'd rather know that. And we work towards that. So it's like, I think we're going to move into this new part of the industry where people understand the original purpose of SOC 2, but also really want to get the value out of it. And hopefully, obviously what, like, as Emma mentioned, what part of what I'm doing here is ensuring we can go get that data, ensuring we can present it to the assessors, ensuring it makes sense for both sides so that people can fix things, but also auditors can do their job. Because I do empathize with them. Auditors do need to level up a little bit. They do need to increase their skills, but they still have a job to do, and it's a very important job, and they play a very important role in our industry.
No, 100%. And obviously like SOC 2 and audits and even pen test and GRC, like everyone kind of gets a bad rep. But it's like if I were designing a car by myself without having ever seen a car, like I wouldn't think to put in airbags, like I wouldn't think about that because I don't know that it doesn't exist yet. So like the point is like these are here for a reason. Like maybe your car doesn't have a door on the sides. Maybe you don't need an airbag in that door because it doesn't exist. But like there's guardrails for a reason. And I think that's where the SOC 2 auditors, I want them to kind of talk a little bit more openly with their clients. I think sometimes there's a tendency for auditors to remain so professional and neutral and detached that they don't want to give like an opinion sometimes. And maybe I got to bring Joe Hansen on here one day and kind of rile them up. I think it's important as a client to know like, hey, you don't need a clean report. Like you don't, this is the goal of it. This is what I want to see. And like you said, getting it back to more collaborative. But when I first did SOC 2, I 100% thought that I had to like have green check marks or I was going to like fail, whatever that word meant. And then the last thing, one thing you said, AJ, that I liked, kind of the transparency. So, I was a police officer for 10 years and I was an officer when body cams came out. And I was like, yeah, like give me a body cam. Like I want the body cam because I know I'm doing the right thing. And like, there's crazy people out here. So I think if you're doing the right thing, you want transparency into your product and into your company. And it's frustrating as pen testing sometimes because like, I want to show them behind the scenes. Like I want to show under the hood because like, I know what we're doing. And the same thing with you guys. So I think that's part of this education is just showing like what you guys are doing under the hood and like, letting people decide if that's, what their company needs and what they're looking for. So anyway,
it's such a good perspective. You don't know what you don't know, especially if you've never done SOC 2 before or you're not a GRC expert, which is what the case is for so many of our customers. Like for AWS, for example, you might have an S3 bucket that you just didn't know it needed to be encrypted. And so that's what our platform can be super informative for. That's like where the automated piece comes in is like, here's a list of all of the data resources you use. And this one isn't encrypted, by the way. Like maybe you should go encrypt it. And then we can guide them to go do that. And so I think that's where automation should focus is helping you get your company into a really good space rather than just like collecting a check the box screenshot.
Yeah. And I think we're going to have a part 2 to this at some point because I just have so many things I want to talk about with you guys. But I think it's also important from leadership to kind of understand that and kind of put it down to their team. Like, hey, the goal of this and even security culture in general, like it's not about finger pointing. Like if we sit down and find a gap, that's a good thing. Like we want to find the gap now and not later when it's used against us. So it's like, but how leaders put down that security culture is extremely important in how people do these audits and do these tests and implement the changes. So one last thing I want to cover before we kind of wrap up is this idea of like a one-time project versus ongoing monitoring and security. How do you guys look at that difference?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want us to move in GRC is to stop treating GRC like a project and treat it like a product. And when you treat it like a product, it's a living, breathing thing. All three of us have built products, and we understand that like you're never done, and there's always things that are wrong. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Feedback is great from a product. Like when a user uses your product and it breaks, you're like, I'm so glad you found that, because now I can go fix it. And I think if we started to treat our GRC programs like products, and I can give an example where throughout the year we're running sprints, and a sprint could be to automate a control. A sprint could be to do a tabletop exercise. A sprint could be your audit. Your audit doesn't become this big, huge, humongous thing that your whole year is built around. It's just another sprint. So if something goes wrong in the audit, it becomes a feedback loop that you just iterate on for the next year, and that actually drives your roadmap. So I think if we say our GRC program is living, it's breathing, it's something that I'm engineering, it's something that I'm actually working on a regular basis and tracking the progress and the growth, it takes away this zero-sum game of audit and that's it. That can't be it, because you're never going to win in that. You have to be able to show continuous improvement. So I think platforms like we're building allow you to step back and treat your program like a product. And I think kind of my nirvana is like the future of where GRC should get to is a control has a failure, whatever reason, somebody's access wasn't removed on time. That should impact your risk register. The insider threat should rise a little bit on that risk, and your risk register should be dynamic based off of your controls, based off of your governance. If we think about what a control is to mitigate a risk. That's the whole purpose of it. So if a control is failing, that risk is no longer mitigated, and somebody should scream at us and say, hey, this risk is higher. We can't get there if this is a one-time-a-year project. It has to be living and breathing so that you treat controls and all these things as inputs and outputs. They're signals. They're just signals to go and do things, but it has to be living and breathing. So I think it goes back to every shift in cybersecurity. It's a mindset shift before it's anything else. Technology for sure helps you and can help you get there. And we're fortunate to be able to build some amazing things nowadays with AI and with everything going on. But you still have to think about it like, hey, this is not a one-time-a-year thing, because if it is, it's going to be the worst few months of your life if you treat it this way every year. If not, you break it up the same way you do with the product. Like, you're not just saying like, I'm launching one feature this year and it's going to happen in October. That would drive people insane. So like, we shouldn't do that in audit either, or GRC.
If you've ever seen me on any panel, pretty much my whole stance is like, okay, yeah, that's a good tech question, but like, also let's talk about the human beings. And it's just like, I know it's so obvious, but it, like you said, it's how we're doing everything. Like, it's so important, and it frustrates me how underrated that mindset part of it is. So I'm glad you brought that up. And kind of, I guess to kind of close out, like we've all been founders. We've all had 1,000 things on our plate, and this is one of them. And there's different opinions coming from different angles, and it's overwhelming. What is one thing you would kind of leave the audience with that is like a practical change people can make to kind of reduce that burden, whether they're looking at new tools, it's their first year, fifth year? What's like one practical thing we can leave the audience with?
I would say the biggest thing you can do for yourself is figure out what things are compounding and how you can design systems so that your life gets easier. So like kind of what AJ was just saying, where when things are a last minute sprint that you like didn't deal with throughout the year, you didn't automate over time, it just becomes a huge disaster all of a sudden, and like this urgent project that distracts you from running your business. And so like SOC 2 is an example of that, but like anything you can do where you're just like iteratively making it better and automating it over time will make your company stronger, will make your team better, will make your company operate in a more secure and high performing manner.
And then at the same time, the more you're automating those things, the more you need the checks and balances, and you need the security register, and you need to make sure that you're checking that risk on an ongoing basis. So it kind of all like circles back together.
Yeah, I mean, in the world of AI, everything needs to become observable, because like you can't trust things without that. And so I think the internet has to become more like composable and transparent in the next year.
And we couldn't trust humans either. It's all the same. Like, it's still the same.
Exactly. I love that when people are like, oh, what about the risk of AI deploying to prod? There's a risk if a human deploys to prod, like a big one. So like the same rules apply. But sorry, like the one last thing that I would leave folks is that in this new world that we're moving in, where we're leveraging AI, where there's so much data, get closer to the source. Whatever you're doing, get closer to the source of that data, get closer to where the data lives. And I don't think we need as much middleware today as we have because of the explosion of SaaS over the last 10 years. You have companies with 300 plus SaaS apps that they know about. There's a lot more that they don't know about. I think if you're thinking about how do I want to run my company in the era of AI, it's as much first party data as possible and being as close to that data as possible. That's obviously selfish because we have a ton of first party data on Rippling, but it's something I truly believe in. It's why I believe in GRC engineering, because GRC engineering is like, hey, like let's, instead of grabbing a JIRA ticket that proves that branch protections were enabled and the code was reviewed, I can just look at the pipeline. I can just go directly to GitHub. So it's going closer to the data. And I think we have to, as a founder, if you're a security leader, you have to think about, is the information that I'm making decisions off of, is that data accurate? And most of the time, It may or may not be, but you should try to get closer to the source. And because we have so much more technology and companies like Rippling that are building on top of a lot of other data, I think it's an easier decision to make to get closer to that data to allow us to make better decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I think, anyone who's kind of just starting out in this and you have no idea what's going on, I think one of the best things I did was when I handed it off to someone else on my team, because as a founder, like I kept treating it as a once a year project because I had so much. And when I gave it to someone who had like ownership and really dove in, that's when that person would come to me and start bringing me all the priorities. And it was a big mindset shift there. I don't think anyone should trust anything we say on this just because we're here and we work for these companies. If someone wants to come like deep dive in, I guess what's the best way for them to do that? Is it check out the website or do a demo, or how are you guys kind of showing people?
Yeah, if you're an existing Rippling customer, you can just reach out to your AM, your account manager, or go to the website and schedule a demo, and like AJ and I will be there helping you figure out the right systems for your company.
Yeah. Whoever your auditor is, pen test partner, GRC, finance person, everything. Just ask more questions. Like, please come pester us with questions, because if it's the right company, they will have the answers for you. And I think that's something I'd love to see in the industry more, is just due diligence and asking questions. I think for me overall, like the biggest takeaway is there are things that should be automated and there are things that shouldn't be. And just because some things shouldn't be doesn't mean we shouldn't automate anything. Like, we're not going back to the Stone Age. And I think there's things in SOC 2 that are kind of going through this evolution. I'm excited to see the evidence collection be more automated. I'm excited to see the first party data and just how that changes what companies see and how they react to threats. And so I think like AJ said, it's a really exciting time in GRC. I think the drama is great because for years we've just been, like, that's annoying. We've just been kind of complaining without having the opportunity to really change it. And right now is that change time. So yeah, I love this time in GRC. I think it's awesome. I appreciate you guys coming on today. I do have 100 more questions, so maybe we'll do another one. But thank you guys so much for being here and just being open about your new product.
Thanks, Valentina. So much fun.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.